High above the Indian Ocean, disaster strikes.
The engine's on fire!
More than 10 kilometers in the air, all 4 engines of a British Airways 747 stopped working.
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9.
With no engines and little power, British Airways Flight 9 falls towards the ocean.
Standby ignition on.
The crew fight to keep their plane from crashing into the sea. What has crippled their massive jet, threatening the lives of everyone on board?
Mayday, mayday.
June the 24th, 1982. British Airways Flight 9 cruises through the sky over Indonesia. In a few hours, the plane and all 263 people on board are scheduled to land in Perth, Australia. Phyllis Welch and her daughter are seated in cabin E at the very back of the enormous jet.
How's that heroine of yours, Fanny Price, faring?
Oh, she's having a tough old time at Mansfield Park. It's a good place for me to spend a few hours.
Wouldn't mind being there myself.
It's all right, Mum, we'll get there.
We had already traversed at least 2 time zones. We were very tired. We had flown through Bombay, through Kuala Lumpur, hadn't been able to get much sleep, if any, and it was a dark, dark, pitch-black night.
Ahead of Betty and Phyllis, Charles Capewell is returning home to Perth, Australia, with his 2 boys, Chaz and Stephen.
Right, settle down, lads. Come on. It's time for a nap. Get back to your seat.
No.
What, do you want to sleep here? All right.
It was a good flight. It was going well. Leaving London, it was great. And we was all eager to go home, and the 2 boys were eager to get back to Mum. I thought, well, we'll be home in 3 hours, Perth. They'll be pat and we'll get in a taxi and we'll be home.
While many of the passengers have been traveling for almost a day, the crew is fresh. They took control at the last stopover in Kuala Lumpur. Captain Eric Moody got his first taste of flying at the age of 16 when he took a gliding lesson. He was one of the first ever trained on the 747.
Roger, check with Jakarta.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9 over Halim at level 370.
Speedbird 9, roger.
First Officer Roger Greaves has been a co-pilot for more than 6 years. Barry Townley Freeman has been a flight engineer on these aircraft for just a little longer.
I'd not flown with Eric before, or Barry. That was the first time we'd actually met on that flight.
As the jet flies over the city of Jakarta, it's cruising at more than 11,000 meters and has been in the air for an hour and a half. Captain Moody checks his weather radar. It shows smooth sailing for the next 500 kilometers.
All right, Roger, it's all clear. Just keep your eyes open. I'll be back in a moment. Just got to use the loo.
Back in the cabin, many of the passengers have fallen asleep. While Charles Capewell and his sons doze, an ominous haze appears above their heads. It's still legal to smoke on passenger jets in 1982. For the cabin crew, though, the smoke seems thicker than normal.
Seems to be a lot of smoke out there.
They begin to worry that a small fire may be smoldering somewhere on the plane.
Maybe someone lit up in the toilet. Let's go see if we can find it.
A fire at 11,000 meters is a terrifying prospect. If there is a blaze somewhere, the crew must find it immediately. In the cockpit, the flight takes an unsettling turn.
Barry and I were just sitting there minding the shop. Pitch dark night, of course. And then we started to get these pinpricks of light on the windscreen.
St. Elmo's fire?
I don't think so.
St. Elmo's fire is a natural phenomenon that's sometimes seen when planes fly through highly charged thunderclouds. But there aren't supposed to be any thunderclouds tonight.
Anything on the radar?
No. No, it's clear. I don't like the look of this. Let's get a better look out there.
With the help of their landing lights, the two men are disturbed to see a thin layer of cloud surrounding their plane, even though nothing is showing up on their radar.
But at 37,000 feet, the normal thing you would anticipate would be high cirrus, which is just a thin layer of cloud.
I think we better get the captain back up here.
I was reading in my book, and there was a slight flick of turbulence, just a slight flick, and I glanced over to the left, where I had a clear view of the port wing, and to my surprise, it was covered in a brilliant, white, shimmering light, which seemed to be clinging to the wing of the aircraft. I carried on reading, but I found that I kept reading the same paragraph over and over again and not taking in a word of it. I just didn't know what was happening.
In the cabin, the smoke begins to thicken. Stewards have been unable to figure out where it's coming from. If there's a fire, they can't find it.
All right, well, go see that the passengers are comfortable.
Smell anything odd, Mum?
Seems rather smoky in here.
I noticed that thick smoke was pouring into the cabin through the vents above the windows. And that was a very sobering sight.
Turkish cigarettes.
It smelt like sort of a sulfuric electrical smell. And I went on that flight deck expecting to hear that we had some electrical smoke somewhere on the aircraft. But nothing was further from the truth.
When did it start? Or just after you stepped out? Anything on radar?
No, it's clear, not a cloud. Oh my lord, look at engine 4! It's lit up somehow. Captain, have a look at number 1.
It's the same on my side.
None of the crew have ever seen anything like this before. But the light show is just the beginning. Their bizarre flight is about to take a terrifying turn for the worse. Strange lights are striking the windshield of a British Airways passenger jet heading to Perth, Australia. At the same time, the plane's engines are lit by a brilliant white glow.
Look at engine 4! It's lit up somehow.
This light show, if you like, had become more intense. In fact, we ended up sitting there with 2 sheets of brilliant white light in front of us in place of the windscreens.
Inside the cabin, smoke has been growing thicker. Chief Steward Graham Skinner has been organising an intense but quiet search for fire.
What's with all the smoke?
There was smoke in the cabin. It got really, really hot. You were perspiring, literally drenched in perspiration. The acrid smoke was at the back of your throat, up your nose, in your eyes, and you were rubbing this and your eyes were running, and it was, not a very nice situation at all.
Flight engineer Barry Townley Freeman has been checking his instruments carefully. He's smelled the smoke, but so far has no indication that there's a fire in any of the plane's systems.
Can't find anything.
With one mystery confronting them, they're suddenly faced with a frightening new situation.
Dad! The engine's on fire!
The whole of the wing was a sheet of light. And I thought, wow. I said, oh, you better close that because we don't know what's that.
Cheers. Sit down. Stephen, close the blind.
Then I realised that, you know, something was dramatically wrong.
There were huge flames coming out of the back of the engines, 20, some people said 40 feet long. These huge jets of sheer flame shooting out of the back of all the engines. Is it going to penetrate from the outside of the aircraft? Is it going to come into the cabin? Are we going to burn to death? Are we going to choke to death on the smoke? What's going to happen? What's causing it? What are they going to do about it?
As fire engulfs the engines, one of them revs loudly and flames out.
Engine failure. Number 4.
Fire action, number 4.
Checklist, power and gear.
Set.
Thrust lever.
Closed.
Start lever.
Off.
Once one engine fails, you call for the drill to shut that one down. You have drills for certain things so that you don't fly together as a crew forever. You can fly with different people then, and you can standardise the operations.
The instruments do not indicate a fire on the plane, but the passengers can see flames erupting from the engines and stretching down the length of the 747.
I could not see the engines from where I was sitting. I could only see the space behind them. But there was enough glow in that space to convince me that the aircraft was really seriously on fire.
We were in trouble. They knew, as long as they were, they knew we were in bad trouble. And they sort of just looked at me as if to say, well, what are we doing now, Dad?
If anything's going to happen, I want to be close to you. Oh, please.
The cabin crew begins storing anything that's loose. They don't want dishes or bottles flying around the cabin if the plane begins to dive.
Don't worry, it's just friction.
If I was misleading them, then that was for a reason, because I didn't want to get as upset as I felt. I just couldn't believe it. And, you know, this is going through my mind, and yet I'm chatting to the passengers and chatting to the crew, saying, oh, yeah, nothing to worry about. Yeah, it's just a little hiccup, you know.
The 747 is more than 10 kilometers above the ocean. Its engines appear to be burning, and peculiar smoke continues to fill the cabin. And then, the unthinkable happens.
Number 2, engine's gone.
All right then, begin the engine shutdown.
No, wait! They've all gone. All 4 engines have failed.
The other 3 just went out almost immediately, and that's when it begins to be a serious emergency.
Those engines made a grating, rumbling sound, almost like a cement mixer. And then, gradually, the noise just disappeared and they became silent.
A minute and a half, we've gone from 4 engines running normally to having none.
The 747 has plenty of fuel, yet somehow all 4 of the jet's engines have completely stopped working.
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines out of 370. Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We've lost all 4 engines.
With no engine power and no idea what has crippled their plane, British Airways Flight 9 begins falling from the sky.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Now out of 360.
First Officer Roger Greaves issues a mayday, but he has trouble getting his message across.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Repeat, all 4 engines. Now descending through flight level 350.
Speedbird 9, you have lost number 4 engine?
This idiot doesn't understand. Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Repeat, all 4 engines. Now descending through flight level 350.
The air traffic control at Jakarta, unfortunately, seemed to have a slight problem in understanding what we actually were saying.
Only when another plane nearby relays the mayday call do controllers in Jakarta understand.
Now descending through flight level 350.
Speedbird 9, all 4 engines out. Understood?
As far as the crew knows, no 747 had ever lost power to all of its engines before. The crew has to find out why it's happening now.
I think we've cocked something up.
We were concerned and worried that we'd done something wrong, to cause the whole thing.
All 3 of us felt exactly the same, and it was a personal guilt in the sense of, what have I missed? What have I done wrong? Because this kind of thing doesn't happen.
While not built for gliding, even without its engines, a 747 can travel forward 15 kilometers for every kilometer it drops. With no power, Flight 9 has started a long, slow fall. Some 10 kilometers above the ocean, the crew has less than half an hour before they smash into the sea.
When they all stop, you go into automatic mode, obviously. We had practiced this drill on the simulator many, many times, and that's very good and all very well, as long as when it happens to you for real, what happens on the aeroplane is mirrored by what happens to you in the simulator, and I'm afraid that wasn't so.
In the simulator, when all 4 engines stop, the autopilot turns off. But high above the Indian Ocean, Captain Moody sees that his autopilot is still on.
We were all 3 confused and concerned that what was happening to us wasn't what we'd been told would happen to us.
All right, begin restart drill.
In the heat of the situation, they have no time to figure out why the autopilot is still on.
On.
Anything? Anything?
No.
Again. All right then, from the top, battery.
Check. On.
Crossfeed valves.
Open.
Fire switch.
In.
The standard restart drill takes up to 3 minutes to complete. Plunging from the sky, the crew has fewer than 10 chances to get their engines going before they run out of time.
Lever on. Come on.
Again, gentlemen.
All right, from the top, battery.
Check. On.
Crossfeed valves.
Open.
Fire switch.
In.
At 10,000 meters, Captain Eric Moody decides to turn the plane back toward the closest airport, Halim, just outside Jakarta. But even that is too far away if he can't get at least some of the engines going again.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, turning left back to Halim, out of 300.
Speedbird 9, radar cannot see you. Squawk Alpha 7700.
Air traffic control asks them to transmit the emergency transponder signal.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, we are already squawking 7700.
Now the crew is flying back to an airport that can't find them on radar. Without the constant rumble of the engines, the cabin is quiet. Some of the passengers feel the plane beginning to descend. But without communication from the cockpit, they can only guess.
The quietness was unbelievable, because it was sort of, the aeroplane was no engines, nothing, and it seemed to be eerie, a bit surreal really, because like as if you was suspended in space or something, and all you could feel was this quietness and the whimpering from a few people that were really upset.
Some people were sitting quite rigidly, almost as if they hadn't noticed anything. At first it was sheer fear. And then, after a while, it turns to acceptance. You know you're going to die. We knew we were going to die.
What's going on? What's the problem?
It's just a technical fault. I've been through much worse, let me tell you. Everything will be fine.
I think if I'd have sat down and really thought of exactly what was happening, I don't think I would have ever got up again.
One steward came up to us and said, "Are you two ladies all right?" And yes, we said, "We're fine," which was an absolute lie, but that's how it was. It seemed absolutely vital not to panic.
Captain Moody can't restart the engines unless he can keep the plane flying between 250 and 270 knots. But the airspeed indicators aren't working.
Captain, I've got 320 knots on my side.
Well, I've got 270.
Well, bloody hell, that's a 50-knot difference.
I'll change the speed.
Falling from the sky with no engine power, the crew now have no idea how fast they're going. But to have the best chance to restart the engines, Captain Moody has to have the plane flying at the right speed.
So from that point onwards, Eric then varied the speed through just about 100-knot range, hoping that at some point or other, coincidental with us putting the fuel into the engines, that we would actually be at the right speed.
To change speeds, Captain Moody turns the autopilot off. Then he slowly pulls the nose of the jet up to slow it, and then pushes it down to increase his speed. The upsetting roller coaster movement adds to the panic felt in the cabin.
At one time, the aircraft developed a strange motion. It seemed to be climbing steeply and then diving down. That was the sensation we got. And a bucking action that was so violent that we felt it could break the aircraft up in the air.
Pressure warning, Captain. We're at 10,000.
Pressure warning? That's not supposed to do that.
And a warning horn went off. Now, this didn't ever happen on the simulator in this exercise, so it was a bit of a surprise to us.
As well as providing electrical power, the engines on a jumbo jet help keep the cabin pressurized.
With the engines not working, of course, the air wasn't being pumped in. So gradually the pressure was leaking away.
With all 4 engines gone, the pressurized air is rapidly seeping out. The thinning level of oxygen makes passengers gasp. The crew reach for their oxygen masks. But First Officer Greaves can't get his mask to work.
My oxygen mask, yeah, that was a problem I could have done without. It was stowed above my head, and when I pulled the oxygen mask down, the mask and the tube became separated.
The captain must make a difficult choice. If he continues to descend slowly, it will get increasingly difficult for First Officer Greaves to breathe.
I said, look, if we get down to 20,000 feet quickly, we can all take our oxygen masks off and we can talk and we're back as a crew again.
We had to actually increase the rate of descent to descend to a lower altitude quicker, which in the circumstances was something that we wouldn't really have chosen to do.
So then I dived the aeroplane and got rid of about 6,000 feet in a minute.
The loss of cabin pressure and the steep dive have another terrifying consequence.
The things shot down, they sort of dangled down in front of you. And I looked to see Stephen had got his and Chaz had pulled his out of the socket. So I made sure that Chaz got his oxygen. I've seen a few movies on planes, and you know, once that happens, you know you're in serious trouble.
Come here. Here we go. Breathe normally, Mum, not deep. Breathe calmly.
The oxygen masks came down, and we put those to our faces as had been described in the drill, which fortunately we had been observing at the beginning of the flight. But it seemed that the oxygen supply was not working.
Come on, get in.
The cabin crew try to use the public address system to explain what's going on, but it's not working. Chief Steward Graham Skinner makes do with a low-tech backup.
Can you hear me? We're having a small problem with the public address system. So if you would, place your masks over your mouth and nose and breathe normally.
As the passengers struggle with their masks, Captain Eric Moody is running out of options. If his engines don't start soon, he'll have to turn his jet around and try landing on the open ocean. High above the Indian Ocean, the seemingly impossible has occurred. All 4 engines on a British Airways 747 have stopped working, and the crew has no idea why. First Officer Roger Greaves manages to fix his broken oxygen mask, but he's still frustrated by engines that won't start.
All right, Barry, let's start the restart drill. Ready? Set. Battery. Check. On. Standby power. On. Anything? Come on, anything.
No.
All right, then, let's do it from the top. Battery.
Check. On.
First Officer Greaves and Engineer Barry Townley Freeman have actually shortened the standard restart drill. It's giving them more chances to get the engines going, but so far nothing's working.
Come on, you old sod.
The process that we were going through the whole time was just continuous. We hadn't had any success with the drill at all, despite all the efforts we were putting in. But it was the only thing we had left to cling on to, so that's what we did.
From the top again. Battery.
Check. On.
I have no idea, and I don't think any of us have, how many times we tried to restart those engines. If I say 20, I would think that's too low. If I say 50, I would think that's probably about right.
As the plane falls lower and lower, Captain Moody faces a brutal choice. A mountain range cuts across the island of Java between his plane and the airport. He knows he has to be at least 3,500 meters high to clear it. But if his engines don't restart soon, they won't make it. At this rate, it will crash in a matter of minutes. It's just a question of where. Captain Moody decides if the engines don't restart soon, he'll turn back towards the ocean and try landing on the water.
All right, are we getting something?
It's not starting.
I knew it was so difficult to land aeroplanes on the sea, even when you had everything going for you. And I thought that, well, we haven't got much going for us here. I'd never done it before.
Hiding his concern, Captain Moody addresses the passengers and crew.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem.
All 4 engines have stopped. We're doing our damnedest to get it under control. I trust you are not in too much distress.
Most of the passengers expect the worst.
Ma, in trouble. Plane going down.
We'll do best for the boys. We love you. Sorry, Pa. I thought we were going down, heading for the ocean, which crashed. And I thought if she got the note, you know, she knew we were still thinking about it. And we did whatever we could.
Will we be burnt alive? Will we be choked by the smoke? Will the aircraft break up in the air and hurtle us out into space, which was my biggest fear? Or will we come down in the sea and be eaten by sharks alive? Or will we crash into a mountain? Let's crash into a mountain quickly and get all this over.
Well?
Nothing. It's not starting.
All right, from the top then. Battery.
Check. On.
Standby power.
On.
Finally, Captain Moody has to decide. carry on and likely crash into the mountains, or turn around and ditch into the sea.
I don't know how to swim.
I couldn't swim anyway, so I thought, well, you know, I'm doomed anyway. And I just hoped that maybe one of the passengers might help the two boys to make sure that they could stay afloat.
Well, anything? No. All right then, from the top again, Gargery.
We had very few chances left of starting the engines before having to turn out to sea again, because we wouldn't have been able to clear the mountains on the south coast of Java.
Start level. Cut off.
Fuel pressure.
Available.
Standby ignition on.
And then, as suddenly as it had stopped working, the fourth engine roars back to life.
Engine 4, back online.
Then all of a sudden there was this sort of like somebody giving the aeroplane a punch from underneath. And then I realised that there might have been an engine. It was a boom.
Oh my God, look.
The noise that a Rolls-Royce engine makes when it starts up is low rumbling noise, you know, and it was just, well, it was wonderful to hear it.
A 747 can fly with one engine, but Captain Moody knows that just one engine still won't give him enough power to clear the mountains.
The glass now is half full, it's not half empty. We're now in with a real chance, and I tell you what, the three of us would have dragged that aeroplane around the whole island of Java.
As the plane falls past 4,000 meters, another engine coughs and comes back to life.
Engine 3, back online.
It's followed quickly by the final two.
I can't believe it. Engines 1 and 2, both back online.
From almost certain disaster, the crippled jet is now under full power.
Oh my God, Mark.
I realised then that we could make it back to, not to Perth, but to an airport. That's all we wanted, was to land on the earth and you know, be part of the living again. Because while we were up there, we were dead.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, we are back in business. All four running, all four.
This time, local controllers have no trouble understanding the message.
All 4 engines serviceable again. Confirm continuing to Halim.
Affirmative, affirmative.
We say, right, let's get this thing on the ground as quickly as we can.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We seem to have overcome that problem and have managed to start all the engines. We are diverting to Jakarta and expect to land in about 15 minutes.
Captain Moody begins climbing, putting plenty of room between his plane and the mountains below. But as he does, the strange lights that he saw when the crisis began reappear in front of the jet.
Now, as soon as we got to 15,000 feet, this St Elmo's fire started again. Now, I'm not slow, so I said, let's get out of here quickly.
But before he can descend very far, the plane is stricken again.
Engine 2 is surging.
The whole aeroplane was shaking. It was just going bang, bang, bang.
The atmosphere in the cabin was very tense and very quiet. By then, I think very few people were talking. I think there were quite a lot of prayers going up.
The engines backfire violently. The captain must make another fateful decision.
Begin shutdown drill.
Checklist powering gear.
Off.
Thrust lever.
Closed.
We were reluctant to do it, as you can probably understand, but, you know, that was it. So we were back on 3 engines.
Now, I'm not a coward, but when you've had 4 engines going, no engines going, you get 4 going and tell me, show me any pilot that will quickly shut down that engine, because you're worried that they're all going to stop again.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, leaving 154, 120. We are now on 3 engines.
As the plane closes in on the airport, First Officer Greaves thinks the windshield is covered in moisture, making it hard to see through.
And I said to Eric, I said, it's a bit misty out there. So we turned the blowers on to kind of, like demisters on your car to try and clear that. That didn't work. I used the windscreen wipers, and that didn't work.
Somehow the glass itself has been badly damaged.
For some unknown reason, I looked out the edge of my windscreen, and about a 2-inch strip down the edge on the left-hand side, I could see much more clearly, but I couldn't see anything much out the front. It was getting more and more opaque the nearer and nearer we got to the lights.
The crew get a final unwelcome surprise. Equipment on the ground that helps them descend at the proper angle isn't working.
Jakarta ATC, be advised, our glide path is unserviceable.
The localizer, which gives you the left and right of the runway centerline, that was working, but the glide slope, which gives you the actual profile for the descent, was not working.
After all the troubles they've been through, now the crew has to land their plane manually.
We then continued with Eric flying the localizer and me calling out the distance and the altitude that he should be at.
300 feet, Captain.
So he was then able to adjust his rate of descent to what I was telling him as far as the glide slope was concerned.
200. 150 feet, Captain. 100. 50 feet. 30 feet.
Oh my God. Oh my God. We're on the runway.
Reverse.
$90 knots, 80 knots.
We're down. Could really go for a cold soda.
And the aeroplane just landed itself. It seemed to anyway. It kissed the earth. It was beautiful.
That's amazing.
Safely on the ground at Halim Airport in Jakarta, passengers celebrate the end of a harrowing ordeal. They also want to know what happened. No fire had been found, so why had smoke filled the cabin? How could all 4 engines have stopped at nearly the same time? What were the strange lights that surrounded the plane? In the cockpit, the flight crew are relieved, but also concerned that they might be at fault.
The first thing that we did, having parked the airplane and shut it all down, was to then go through all the paperwork to see if there was possibly anything anywhere in it that might have given us any pre-warning of some sort of phenomenon that caused what happened to us.
Every time, because it's going to come back to us.
The damage to the 747 is extensive. From the outside, the crew realize that their windshield had been deeply scratched. They see bare metal showing through where the paint has somehow been stripped away. And they still have no idea why any of it happened. When investigators uncover the cause of the disaster, Flight 9 changes pilot training around the world. During a calm flight to Australia, all 4 engines of a British Airways 747 suddenly stopped working. After a long, terrifying descent, the crew managed to restart the engines and land.
That's amazing.
They spent an excited and largely sleepless night in Jakarta, before returning to Halim Airport to inspect their plane.
And we went back the next day to look at it in daylight. The aeroplane had lost its sheen, and in some places it had been sandblasted quite well, and all the decals and the paint had come off. It was very little to see until they stripped the engines down.
The engines were manufactured by Rolls-Royce. Their investigation was led by a former engineer, Malcolm Grayburn.
3 of the engines were removed in Jakarta following the incident and were ferried back via cargo aircraft to London Heathrow and then transported to South Wales, where the engines were in fact stripped down into piece parts, and it was there that I got involved.
Grayburn was stunned by what he saw. Much of the engine was badly scratched and scored.
We did do a forensic analysis of the engines, and we did record it all in terms of photographic analysis, and also we did a lot of laboratory analysis.
Grayburn discovered the engines were choked with fine dust, pieces of rock and sand. When it was closely studied, they learned that the debris was clearly volcanic ash. Days after their harrowing flight, the passengers and crew learned that the night they were flying, there'd been a major eruption of the Mount Galunggung volcano, located just 160 kilometers southeast of Jakarta. Tom Casadevall is director of the US Geological Survey and has studied the Galunggung volcano.
Indonesia is the world's most volcanically active country. It has more than 130 historically active volcanoes, meaning volcanoes which have erupted in the last several thousand years. Galunggung erupted explosively early in the 1980s. In April, May, June of 1982, the eruptions became increasingly more powerful.
The eruptions were large and the damage was extensive. More than 60,000 people were evacuated from the area around the mountain. The night Flight 9 flew nearby, the volcano erupted again. As the ash cloud rose more than 15,000 meters into the night, winds pushed it to the southwest, right into the path of British Airways Flight 9. Never before had a volcanic cloud seriously affected an airplane. Could the ash really have crippled this flight?
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines.
Unlike ash that you might see in a chimney or after a fire in a forest, this is not soft material at all. This is very fine, ground-up particles of solid rock and minerals. This material is very, very abrasive. It's very angular in shape. If you were to see it under a microscope, you would see very sharp angles. And so that's what caused the abrasion.
In addition to sandblasting the windshield and all the leading edges of the plane, could the ash cloud explain all the other strange phenomena the passengers and crew had experienced?
Remember, the aircraft is moving in close to 500 miles per hour as it's flying into that cloud. Even though it's a very fine material, it can still cause abrasion and friction on the skin of the aircraft. Because it's such a dry environment up there, that frictional electrification produces the glow that we refer to as St. Elmo's fire.
The electrification also caused the interference in communication experienced by the crew.
Speedbird 9, you have lost number 4 engine?
Some of the volcanic ash that was sucked in and ground up by the engines was also blown into the plane, and when passengers and crew saw it swirling through the cabin, they feared the worst.
You're a passenger, you're looking out the window, suddenly you start breathing this sulfur-laden air in the cabin, and it probably is a choking, probably a shocking sensation. It's essentially a house of horrors type situation.
While the volcanic ash caused the visible scarring, filled the plane with smoke and fouled communications, could it cause the engines to flame out as well?
X-ray from front to back of the engine.
A turbofan jet engine works by sucking in enormous amounts of air. The air is then highly pressurized by the engine's compressor. This tightly packed air is mixed with fuel and ignited. The force of this reaction propels the jet through the sky.
The temperature in the combustion chamber where this ash is flowing through are around 2,000 degrees centigrade. And so the volcanic ash we know melts at about 1,300, 1,400 degrees.
But when the liquid ash reached deeper into the engine, it cooled slightly, turning into a sticky molten goo. It attached itself to the engine and began choking it.
We got a fundamental disturbance of the airflow in the main core of the engine, which caused the engine to backfire, and the engine's flamed out, and that was the cause of the problem.
Backfires occur when the engine isn't burning cleanly.
The engine's on fire!
There's too much fuel and not enough oxygen.
Engine failure, number 4.
Fire action, number 4.
Checklist powering gear.
On Flight 9, the backfires were the cause of the enormous jets of flame many passengers saw behind the engines. After struggling against the choking effects of the ash cloud, the engines on board the 747 flamed out. What Grayburn found next was that a remarkable piece of chemistry saved the plane.
As soon as you came out of the volcanic ash, and the engines were not running, remember, so everything cooled down, it was enough for this stuff to break off and allow the engines to restart.
When enough of the molten ash was gone, the engines were clear again, and Townley Freeman's frantic efforts to restart them paid off.
Engine 4, back online.
We have learned quite a bit, and we've incorporated this learning into pilot training. Pilots now, for example, know what signs to look for when they might be in an ash cloud, and those signs include the odor of sulfur in the cabin, dust accumulating in the cabin, and if you're at night, you might look out and see the frictional electrification or the St. Elmo's fire on the leading edges of the aircraft.
Another important lesson learned from Flight 9 is that volcanic ash clouds do not appear on normal weather radar, which reflects water. Since the clouds are dry, they're all but invisible to radar. That knowledge has led to better communications between the geologists that study volcanoes and the international airlines that fly over them. The crew of Flight 9 was showered with awards and commendations in the months after their incredible night.
I thought the airmanship displayed by this crew during this event was absolutely fantastic. The way that they managed to guide this aircraft back down to a safe landing after having been through such extreme circumstances, it was fantastic the way they recovered this aircraft. Absolutely brilliant.
For everyone on board Flight 9, the terrifying plunge through the skies had a lasting impact. Betty Tutel was so struck by the events of that night that she wrote a book about the ordeal.
This was an event which was unique in aviation history, and it seemed to me absolutely vital that it should be put on record, and I wondered who was going to do this. But no sooner had that thought entered my mind than I thought, I'm going to do that.
Tutel would also end up marrying a man she met on the flight, James Ferguson. Charles Capewell and his 2 sons made it home 2 days after they touched down in Jakarta. 25 years later, both Chaz and Stephen still live in Perth.
Our time hadn't came and that was it. From then on, I took a different view of life. When your time comes, there's nothing you can do, but you can still hope. And we hoped, and we got out of it.
Not long after their fateful flight, Captain Eric Moody created the Galungung Gliding Club. Every member of the crew and all passengers were automatically admitted to this exclusive group. The survivors of British Airways Flight 9 happily stay in touch to this day.
And you didn't need to wait for a command in this situation.
There was fire, and I shouted to Suzanne, "Fire on the wing."
She ran back to my exit
and saw Suzanne standing there, getting ready to open the door, and just saw the door crumple like cheap tinfoil. And I thought, oh my God, we're trapped.
I was staring at the door, and I yelled, "Unfasten your seatbelts, remove your shoes, leave everything, come this way." And as I stared at the door, a jagged hole seemed to open up in the roof over the door.
And the next thing I knew, I was outside that. I don't know how I got out there.
Joan was standing there yelling, "Suzanne, take my hand."
And I was standing above the level of the door on fuselage rubble pieces. And I leaned down and said to Suzanne, "Give me your hand."
She grabbed me out with one hand. I mean, I don't know how she lifted me.
And then we were standing up on top of almost on top of this airplane. And I thought, it's really a long ways down. If we jump, we're going to break our legs.
We were on debris. It was like ice flows, big chunks of fuselage kind of moving all around.
The engines were starting to disintegrate already. We could hear them disintegrating and throwing metal.
I lost Joan's hand very quickly, so I jumped. And it seemed like the leap from a second-story building.
The captain, he elected to jump down in the first-class section of the airplane, and when he hit the first-class floor, the floor collapsed and he fell on down into the cargo area. It was so hot that the oxygen bottles exploded and burned him very badly, as a matter of fact.
It was a survival mode that kicked in, and it was just get out of that airplane. I didn't stop to think about how it happened.
I went to where the door would have been, and I left my wife seated. And then it came to me, what am I doing? Where's my wife? So I turned around, and she was coming, and I said, "I will jump and try and break your fall."
My husband was sitting to my right, and I undid his seatbelt and kind of pushed him out of his seat to get him moving. And we headed for the door that was closest to us. And it was engulfed in flames, and there was no way to exit that way. I looked over, and at some point, someone had opened the other door, which was amazing to me. And I just yelled over here and headed toward the door on the other side, which was, again, the wing door.
In the haste to get out of the burning plane, Karen became separated from her husband. He died in the flames.
I immediately thought it was total destruction. It never dawned on me that I would make it. But I thought, hey, do something. Don't just sit there, do something. I just went over the seat backs, and I'm not that athletic really, but I went over 3 rows of seats. One man was sitting there looking like I need help, but I couldn't help him.
When KLM hit us, all communication stopped. The tower called and couldn't get any response from either the KLM or ourselves. There was an airplane in the holding pattern right above Tenerife. Called the tower and said, "I see smoke and wreckage on your runway."
Rodeos approach Sterling 105. We're downwind from runway 30 and something's glowing on the field. Looks like a fire. Are you aware of any fire?
Shit, this can't be true! Come on, come on! Come on, come on!
He hits the emergency warning. After KLM hit us, he went on down the runway and hit on the runway 1,500 feet down, closer to the tower. So when the fire truck and the ambulance came out, they got to him first. So no one came to us for quite a while. As a matter of fact, I remember thinking, I wonder why somebody hasn't gotten out here to help us.
It's complete bedlam. In the fog, the fire trucks don't know where to go. When they eventually find the Dutch plane, it's hopeless. Everyone's dead. And the whole time, they don't realize there's a second plane a short distance away, hidden in the mist, with people waiting to be saved. It's another 20 minutes before the Pan Am plane is discovered. Only 20% of the Pan Am passengers get out alive, and most of them are gathered on the left wing, which has somehow miraculously remained intact.
The entire left wing of the airplane was covered with passengers. And it turned out there were probably 45 to 50 passengers out on that wing.
I've never asked anybody how high the wing is from the ground on a 747, but it looks to be a very long ways.
And I cut open my head and fractured my foot. My wife jumped after me, and she said, "I cannot walk." And I dragged her on her side for probably a block and a half away from the plane.
The motors were going full tilt, and I didn't want to get over where the motors were, so I sat down by the body of the plane. I had no comprehension at that moment that I would be jumping off the wing and
In the debris, you knew there were trapped passengers and people, and there was absolutely nothing you could do to help because the airplane was collapsing in on people.
Only one door was opened by a crew member, and that was one of the black flight attendants who did that. And she lost her life when the engine disintegrated and debris hit her. And I thought if we could just walk around to the other side of the plane, we would find all of the passengers and our other fellow crew members. Which, of course, wasn't the case.
Even 20 minutes after the disaster, the controllers in the tower still have no idea how serious things are.
Departing aircraft. All departures are suspended until advised. Hello.
I'll get local fire out here. Notify the ambulance. We have an emergency. We need every vehicle they've got.
What have we done? This can't be our fault. I mean, I told him to clear the taxiway.
When I got out on the ground, I could hear people screaming and yelling and all. Within about 5 minutes, you heard absolutely nothing. There was no noise at all, just the airplane burning. I asked one of our medical directors later on what he calls that, and he said that when you have a fire that hot and that much of a fire, it consumes all of the oxygen in there, and people basically suffocate.
I felt so responsible because I couldn't take care of my passengers, and so helpless in looking back and knowing that there's nothing you can do. You can't get back in the aircraft. There's no way to get in it, and it's all on fire.
Of the KLM plane, very little remains. It had continued flying for another 400 meters before slamming into the ground. The 55 tons of fuel it had taken on ensured that everyone on board died in the fiery explosion.
It was personal vehicles, cars and trucks that seemed to come onto the grass and gather up people.
About 75% of our surviving passengers got to the hospital in taxicabs.
It was a wild, crazy ride as we were going to the hospital. The skin was hanging on both hands because I had received burns, but it hadn't affected my eyes.
I had blood all over me, and I walked up to somebody and said, "I'm a doctor, can I help?" And the guy that I said it to had the oddest look on his face, just this very wan smile, and he just shook his head, and then I immediately went into a coma.
Word soon gets out. and in the hours that follow, the international press begin to arrive, and the first news is flashed around the world.
Rescue workers are still going through the wreckage of the 2 jetliners this morning in the Canary Islands. They're looking for the bodies of victims in this worst accident in aviation history. 2 jumbo jetliners, 747s, collided on the ground at the airport at Santa Cruz de Tenerife yesterday morning.
One was a Pan Am charter from Los Angeles that picked up more people in New York before flying to the Canaries. The other was a KLM charter from Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
They set up a morgue in one of the hangars, and it was huge, and they had all of the nearly 600 bodies in that particular hangar, or temporary morgue.
The death toll rises to 583 people, nearly twice as big as any previous accident. And then everyone begins asking the same questions. How and why could 2 state-of-the-art airliners smash into each other on the same runway? Very soon, a whole army of investigators begins arriving from the 3 countries involved, Spain, Holland, and the United States. Under the rules that govern this sort of thing, they all have a right to be there, but that doesn't mean they're going to get along. In Spain, the military still runs everything, including aviation. When the American team from the National Transportation Safety Board arrives, the Spanish general in charge won't even let them into the room.
I sneaked in, and I went to the general and told him, General, my name is Luis Carmona. I represent the U.S. government, the NTSB, and I am here to participate in the investigation. He answered back to me, I represent the king, and you get out. So as I was walking out, he looked at me again, and he said, hey, you don't look American. And I told him, well, yes, I am an American, but I was born in Cuba. And he said, well, so did I. I was also born in Cuba. So he turned around and he asked me questions and asked me to bring my team in, and we started doing the accident investigation then.
The investigators discover the chain of coincidences that had led remorselessly to the deaths of 583 people. If any one of them had not occurred, neither would the accident. The first had nothing to do with airplanes, a terrorist bombing perpetrated by a small group fighting for their independence. Their intent was to create publicity for their cause. In that, they certainly succeeded.
There are 2 bombs in the terminal. You have 10 minutes to save as many lives as you wish.
The airport is closed. Divert to Los Olivos Airport via Tenerife VOR. Descent flight level 250.
Because of the bomb, all air traffic was rerouted to Los Rodeos Airport on the neighboring island of Tenerife. But it's a small regional airfield with only 1 runway. A 747 can land there. The runway is long enough, but that's all. The airport is ill-equipped and unable to handle that amount of planes or people.
Lima Tango 107, you are clear to descend to flight level 80.
Sunset 282, switch to ground now.
Contact standby for taxi clearance. KLM 4805, clear to land runway 30. Pan Am 1736.
Pan Am 1736, short final.
As luck would have it, this tidal wave of traffic happens on a Sunday afternoon, when there are just 2 controllers on duty. They're good, but not used to handling as many airplanes as on that day. Big airplanes that need lots of room to park. They are confronted with an enormous jigsaw puzzle.
We'll be here all night, you know that, right?
Or you can go out there and take us to another runway.
Meanwhile, in the KLM cockpit, the stress is mounting.
Any idea of how much longer we've got before we need to get other crew down to take over?
Yeah, well...
KLM had recently introduced new company rules, which handed out severe penalties for pilots who exceeded their flying hours.
What happens if we go over the civil and company time limits?
Well, you get hung out to dry. You lose your license, your career, everything.
The KLM plane has to get away before 5:30 that afternoon or abandon the flight. Hundreds of passengers would then have to be found hotels on this small island. A new crew would have to be flown in from Amsterdam. The expense would be enormous.
Willem, since we're trapped in here until the passengers get back, we might as well take on some fuel.
But that seemingly simple decision seals the fate of everyone aboard the KLM. Refueling not only delays him for half an hour and the Pan Am stuck behind him, it makes the KLM plane so heavy it'll be unable to lift off and clear the Pan Am plane on the runway. The half-hour delay has another effect. During that time, the weather changes abruptly. Los Rodeos is an unusual airport. It's on a plateau high in the hills.
Los Rodeos Airport is at 2,000 feet elevation, and the normal clouds in the area, they stay about 2,000 feet. So when the wind blows the clouds over the airport, it closes the airport. The visibility goes to zero, and it goes on and off all the.
Unfortunately, for an airport that's constantly lost in fog, Los Rodeos is ill-equipped to deal with it. It has no ground radar so that controllers can see where the planes are. In fact, the facilities are downright primitive.
When he was not, they had a person sitting in a building next to the runway, and he just took a visual measurement of the weather, and that's how the weather was checked. And that's about all.
In the fog that day, both aircraft are invisible to the controllers.
I lost them. I can't take no visual contact.
There are no runway center lights working either. Visibility is on the borderline of what is safe. In fact, as far as the Pan Am crew is concerned, it's below the legal minimum, so no aircraft can take off.
Look at it out there. I mean, this cloud just rolled right onto us. I don't think anybody has the minimums now.
But the Dutch are working to a different set of rules. The scene is all set for a disaster. What will actually trigger it? The Dutch investigators thought they'd found the reasons.
God damn it. Of all the days this has to happen. Just when Spain is going to teach Hungary a lesson in football.
The controllers, they say, were listening to the football on the radio. Perhaps their minds weren't on the job. Furthermore, their bad English had confused the pilots.
Taxi into the runway. And leave the runway third. Third to your left.
Third to the left, okay.
Third, he said?
3.
Third. Third to your left.
I thought he said
leave the
first.
runway third to your left. Third one, sir. 1, 2, 3. Third. Third one.
1, 2.
Good, well, that's what we need, right? The third one.
Uno, dos, tres.
We were listening to the controller talking to the other airplanes. We were listening to the controller giving the ATC clearances, the taxi clearances. And he spoke clear enough English for anyone, I think. So I'd have to say, no, I don't think the controller was involved at all. I don't think he had any fault at all in this accident.
1736, just checking that.
That's the 45 there.
But the Dutch haven't finished yet.
Yeah, that's this one here.
Yeah, I know.
They make an even more controversial claim, one that provokes a blazing row, that the Pan Am plane had caused the accident by being on the runway when it shouldn't have been. They hadn't followed orders to turn off.
Okay, for sure.
Maybe he counts these as 3.
Oh, I like this.
They were going to taxiway 4. He was instructed to go on 3, but he had to go 4 because taxiway number 4 was the one that had 45 degrees, and it was easy for the 747 to access it.
We said, confirm which taxiway you want to take, and he says, the third on your left, 1, 2, 3, the third on your left. And here again, I still believe this. I think he had seen us go by the first one, and when he says count 3 more taxiways, the third, 1, 2, 3, we were doing exactly what we thought he meant for us to do, and I still think that's what he meant for us to do. It was the logical taxiway to take.
Whether they should have taken the 3rd or 4th exit became largely irrelevant anyway, because it became clear that Captain Van Zanten had made one of the most elementary mistakes a pilot can make. He'd taken off without permission.
We have 700 meters visibility here now.
Wait a minute. We don't have ATC clearance.
I know that. Go ahead, ask.
KLM 4805 is now ready for takeoff. We're waiting for ATC clearance.
KLM 4805, you're clear to the Papa Beacon.
The KLM is given its ATC clearance, which is simply the route it must follow after takeoff. Now, it must wait for permission to take off.
325 radial at Las Palmas VOR.
Roger, sir. We're cleared to the Papa Beacon, flight level 90. Right turn out 040 until intercepting the 325. We're
going.
But why didn't his crew stop him?
It's very difficult for a co-pilot or a flight engineer to tell the captain, hey, look, you missed something.
Tenerife exposed a problem that had long existed in commercial air travel. The pilot was regarded, and often regarded himself, as God.
The captain is always right. He's never wrong.
No junior officer was ever going to contradict the airline's top pilot, the man who'd given him his license.
Panam 1736, report runway clear.
We declare that.
What do you say?
Is it declared at Panam?
Oh, yes.
Captain Van Zanten, highly stressed, knowing that he has to take off or abandon the flight. His crew, aware that he's done wrong but frightened to tell him. Disaster is now inevitable.
God damn. Come.
The official report is written by Spain. It blames the accident on Captain Van Zanten's decision to take off without permission. The Dutch refuse to accept it. They publish their own report, blaming language difficulties and the general confusion at Los Rodeos.
What I learned from the Tenerife accident is that regardless of how well-qualified, experienced, professional, and exact professional you are, okay, accidents, as long as human beings are involved, accidents can always take place.
The insurers pay out a record sum, $2 billion in today's money. As for the survivors, the images of the 27th of March will always be with them. They've just learned to live with them, that's all.
And whenever I have friends that travel, I tell them, make sure you know where your exit is, make sure you read all that stuff, know how to get out of the airplane. I mean, those are important things.
I never had nightmares. I had only dreams about being helpless and being at an airport behind a big, thick window and watching an airplane take off and knowing that it was going to crash and wanting to shout out, but there's this big, thick glass window. You're just helpless, and that's what you feel, is this, because our responsibility is to take care of everyone, and that's what we want to do, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't save them.
The loss of my husband had a tremendous impact on my life, on my son's lives, on my extended family's lives. It was huge.
Then you can see how strange life is, you know, that things like that happen, that you get off and they go on, and perhaps if the plane left a minute later, it wouldn't have happened.
I think it brought home to me how quickly you can leave this life and how everyone should enjoy life every and each day as much as you possibly can.
Well, after the crash, I decided to start a family. I thought maybe I will stay home and have children.
I thought, you know, my friends have died, and if I let myself sit in this little apartment, it's going to be as if I'm curled up and died, and that's not fair to them. I can honor them best by living a life, a full life, and not being afraid.
I am blessed because I do not have any horror left over from the accident.
I felt ashamed the first while. And a long time I thought, you know, I wish I died, because I felt very bad.
I was scared for quite a while after the crash, but I knew if I flew with Joan, she would pull me out again.
I had to quit the NTSB. I didn't retire. I felt so bad that I became ill. I had to go to a doctor and get some medication because I got sick.
I went back to Tenerife, my wife and I had a driver take me out to the airport and show me the runway, and I looked at it all. I did it all over again. And then I went back and took the Golden Odyssey steamship from the Royal Cruise Line to sort of complete the situation which I had missed.